When God calls, often hard things follow. The prophet Jonah received such a call to preach against a people he despised, known for their violence. So he fled. But God, in his relentless grace, found Jonah, and through the threat of a mighty storm and the unlikely shelter of a great fish, brought him back to face his call and to see how much further this grace would go.
And a very good Sunday evening to my friends from Brumley Baptist Church. If you have a Bible today, we're going to continue in the book of Jonah as we have started a series here thinking about who Jonah was and what he has done. And we're just continuing to kind of consider the last part of the first chapter in the book of Jonah. Before he gets in the fish, before he gets away from the rest of the sailors, he has kind of this interaction and he has this major issue wherein he knows what's going on, and the rest of the sailors aren't quite sure, but there's going to be some agreement over exactly what's going on here before they are done in just a moment. So we're going to see that here today. So that's what we're going to note, I think, in the first part of this week's lesson, is that there is a definite coming to an agreement over who Jonah is and why he's there between him and the sailors. You have to remember that Jonah jumped on a boat and didn't really tell anybody else, didn't really let anybody else know what was going on. He knew where he was and he knew who he was running from, but he did not let any of the other sailors know that because he was a very small man. When sin has entered our life and we are on the run from God and we're trying to get away from God, we lose all care and concern for other people. Jonah does not care about anybody else at this point in his life. He doesn't care about these sailors. He doesn't care that he could harm them or even cause them to die out in this storm. He doesn't care about how his sin affects anyone else. And sadly, that's a characteristic of a sinful person. When someone has moved far away from God, they become even more selfish. Their sins have completely taken them over, and they become blinded to how those sins affect literally anyone else. And it becomes in of itself a major problem. And so I want us to note that here as we do this deep dive into Jonah in these early chapters. This is still in chapter 1, verse 4. Then the Lord hurled a violent wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose on the sea that the ship threatened to break apart. The sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God. They threw the ship's cargo into the sea to lighten the load. Meanwhile, Jonah had gone down to the lowest part of the vessel and had stretched out and fallen into a deep sleep. The captain approached him and said, "What are you doing sound asleep? Get up, call to your God. Maybe this God will consider us and we won't perish." "Come on," the sailors said to each other, "let's cast lots. Then we'll know who is to blame for this trouble we're in." So they cast lots, and the lot singled out Jonah. Then they said to him, "Tell us who is to blame for this trouble we're in. What is your business? Where are you from? What is your country? And what people are you from?" If we wanted to call this week casting of Jonah, we would be able to do that because there's going to be multiple castings of things in this story. So let's start thinking about the different castings that there are. Before they cast Jonah into the sea, notice the wind, the casting of the wind. Verse 4. Then the Lord hurled a violent wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose on the sea that the ship threatened to break apart. This is the direct action of God. Jonah won't preach for God, so God preaches instead to Jonah, and he uses a storm to do so. Remember, the genesis of this story is, hey, Jonah, I want you to go speak for me. God asked Jonah to go speak for him, speak out against him, speak a word of judgment, speak a word of repentance, do something. Jonah won't do it. Jonah won't go speak for God, so God has to now speak to Jonah. He's got to get his attention. He's got to do whatever it is to grab his attention to get him to listen to him, basically. God cares much more about the holiness of his people than he does the happiness of his people. And he will do whatever he needs to do to get our attention. And sometimes that may be a difficult thing for us to deal with, a difficult pill to swallow, a difficult circumstance to go through. But God will do that if he needs to. Why? Because our holiness is the most important thing we can ever have. People would say, well, my health is the most important thing. No, it's really not. Your holiness is the most important thing you have, because it's, according to the Sermon on the Mount, without holiness, no one has seen God. And isn't seeing and knowing God the most important relationship we possess? Of course it is. So our holiness becomes the chief, most important possession that we could ever hope to have. God wants us holy. And so he sends this wind to try to get Jonah, the preacher's, attention. Notice, secondly, the wailing. Verse 5. The sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his God. They threw the ship's cargo into the sea to lighten the load. Meanwhile, Jonah had gone down to the lowest part of the vessel, stretched out and fallen into a deep sleep. If you go down later in the story, it says that every man cried out to his own God. Everybody wanted their God to answer. This is wailing. This is wailing. Let's start with the sailors. It says the sailors became afraid. This gives us evidence that this storm is not an ordinary storm. Sailors encountered storms all the time. These were sailors. These were hard, rugged men. This is what they did for a living. They were very familiar with what it was to be out in a storm, out on the water, and in a dangerous position. This was entirely normal for them. This was a regular occurrence for any sailor to go out and be part of a storm. Yet in this one, there was something a little different. There was something extra about this storm. This had a little more danger. This had a little more fear in it. This had a little more concern in it than any of the other storms they had been in. And so there was a great deal of concern here. They were scared. They were afraid. And so because of their fear, they wailed and they cried out to their own God. I would give us a note that the sin of one involves other people. Again, you are not an island. I am not an island. My sin affects you. Your sin affects me. We are in the Christian walk together, and our sin spills over. And if we're not careful, we can cause other people a great deal of pain through no fault of their own, but literally just because of our own sins. Now, I would imagine I already know the answer to this question, but how would you feel if your sin caused someone else to go through a very, very difficult hardship in their life? I'd imagine that it would break your heart to see someone else suffer a great deal, and it wasn't because of their sin, but because of your own sin. Jonah is causing these sailors to suffer a great deal, and it is entirely because of his sin. Now, they were pagans. They worshiped foreign gods. They all cried out to their gods with a little g. And so they obviously were not walking in the truth either. But this storm, this instance, was directly because of Jonah's sin and nobody else's, according to our passage. So there's a major problem with that. There's a great deal of wailing. And the second wailing is every man cried to his own God. Whatever religion one has is stirred up when you're in a dangerous circumstance. Something bad happens, everybody cries out to whatever religion they kind of hold dear, logic or a god of some sort or a concept of some sort. Be nice, be kind. We have lots of things that are in our world today that people don't call religions but really are. Politics is a religion, power and influence are religions. There's all sorts of things out there that take this place. I teach this as a concept in my World Religions class at Conway Christian. A religion is just anything that devotes and develops your life. So even though atheism technically is the belief in no God, it is a religion because it directs and dictates everything about your life. So they were worshipers of foreign gods. They began to cry out to those gods because something bad has happened. So that's part of this story. But here's what I would have you note about that. Even pagan religions believe that God will punish sin. Notice what they say there in verse number 5. They cried out to their own gods. Which one of, and then they asked Jonah later in our passage, which one of, whose God is responsible for this? Again, even made up, fictitious, non holy gods, pagan gods. These men even believe that they're pagan gods, that God punishes sin. So why would we not believe that when we serve Jehovah, the holy, high, and lofty God? They believe their gods will punish sin. Do we believe that our God will punish sin? Because if you do not, then I must tell you, you are wrong. You're mistaken. The God that we serve, the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he punishes sin. He punishes wrongdoing. When sin takes place, he punishes it. He has every right to do so, and he will do so. And so there's wailing, each to their own God. And then there is the wrongdoing. The wrongdoing. Before the wrongdoing, is witness the work. Witness the work. Look in verse number 5 here. The sailors were afraid. Each cried to his own God. They threw the ship's cargo into the sea. Literally, the best way to describe this is they took handfuls of money and chunked them overboard, because that's what they lost when they lost their cargo. Whenever the ship arrived where it was supposed to, they were to take that cargo and then it would sell, and that's what made them money. Sometimes they had already paid for the cargo and then they took it somewhere else and they had to sell it and make that money back plus any profit they could make. Sometimes it was a little different depending on the circumstance, but cargo equals money, period. That's how scared they were. That's how concerned they were, that they were willing to throw money overboard. I'm going to tell you, the only way that you're willing to throw money overboard is if you think that it might save your life. That's work. That was their work. They were in life-saving survival mode. The boat's going to break up. The storm's going to kill us all. We're going to die. We're in life-saving mode here. Throw it overboard. Again, that just tells us the desperate situation that they were in, to be willing to do that, throwing the ship's cargo to lighten the load. And then, while that's going on, witness the wrongdoer here. What is he doing? He's down there asleep. Jonah had gone down to the lowest part of the vessel and had stretched out and fallen into a deep sleep. He'd gone in the wrong direction. He's down in the lowest part of the boat. He's away from everybody else. He's not near anybody else. He's alone. He's asleep down in the low part of the boat. That's the wrong direction. Again, I've noted every time we've talked about Jonah, we've talked about his downward direction. He has continually gone downward in direction, to the wrong direction every single time. And he continues that here. He's wrong in his decision. He laid down and went to sleep. Proverbs 19:15 says, laziness casts into a deep sleep, and an idle man will suffer hunger. That's how nonchalant he is about this. He's running from God, and he's so complacent with it, he's able to go to sleep. He doesn't even seem to care at this point. And that's why I think God has to send such a large storm, because of the nonchalant attitude of Jonah here. He doesn't care so much that he's just snoozing, just taking a nap. And so God has to say, okay, if that's how uncaring you are, I've got to do something big here to get your attention. He's wrong in his decision, and he's wrong in his deeds. Isn't this amazing? He's the prophet of God, yet he's the only person on the entire boat not praying. He's the only one that truly believes in God, the right God, the correct God, has the right theology, yet he's the last one to start praying. Now that says something about his relationship with God, doesn't it? Everybody is there. Everybody that's on the boat is praying, is crying out, is calling out to their God, except the one who serves the God that can actually fix the problem. He's the only one who is not crying out to his God. So witness the wrongdoer. No wonder he's going to be cast over the boat. No wonder he's going to be sent down to where the big fish will receive him. And we will go into that next time as we discuss the character of a very, very small prophet. I appreciate you joining me again here today. I hope you have a good and godly day. And until I see you again, go serve your King.